Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Maker's Bar. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. We are creating 1 million leaders here at Maker's Bar, and today I have an interesting one I'm really excited to have a conversation with. His name is Brian Eskow. He is the host of Searching for Political Identity podcast. He has recently gained tens of thousands of followers on Twitter or X. Very excited to have the conversation. Very excited to learn about his journey and story. And Brian, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And the way I usually start these is tell me your story. What is your journey? You can start from childhood, school, wherever you want to start that, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So my story is that I come from a very left-leaning family, politically influenced heavily by my dad and his two brothers. They're just active, and they're left-leaning, and they're smart, and they're knowledgeable, and they have high integrity, and they're cool, and they're interesting. And so connecting with my dad through politics was an easy thing to do, and so that's what we often did. We always had the news on during dinner, often, and so that's just kind of the house I grew up in. My dad's a high intellect, intellectually reads everything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so we were always told about how lucky we were to be middle class family, all that, and so it was really beaten into me that the Democrats were the party of fairness and all of that, and the rich should pay their fair share. That's just how I grew up. And so I voted left my whole life since 2008 when I became eligible to vote because I was influenced by my dad. I was just a man of the left. I mean, that's just what it was. And then 10 years went by. I'm a construction manager. I was just kind of working, not much going on. And for whatever reason, in 2018, I really think it was just out of pure boredom. I got myself into law school, which was a big deal for me. And I loved and really set me on this journey to end up being a podcast host. And, the long and the short of it is that I was searching for meaning, searching for something more interesting to do for work, searching for something to scratch that intellectual itch, because I really hadn't been scratching it. That's kind of the point, actually, of that 10-year period. Very selfish, very unproductive. I did a lot of reading as a kid, but really did not nurture my intellect, is the point. And so suddenly I realized that was a problem. I got myself into law school, and I loved law school, and it nudged me to the right a little bit, just in the sense that, you always know that traditional American culture is based around the individual and all of that, protecting the individual rights, the Bill of Rights, that kind of thing. But when you study it, you really have a newfound respect for it. And I said, okay, I like this American system. This is all great. And so that just had an effect of nudging me to the right, in the sense that, hey, anyone can thrive here if they play by the rules. Always interested in politics, I guess, is kind of the big picture point. Always enjoyed talking to people about politics. So I go to law school to entertain that interest, really. And that's the first 3 years. I went at night while continuing to work. So the first 3 years was the core curriculum, and that nudged me to the right, loved it. And then because I'm my father's son, because I'm interested in, the marginalized, all of that, I take these 2 electives in critical race theory in my final year. And they blew me away. And when I tell people about those 2 courses in critical race theory, I say, look, the professor was brilliant. He was fair, and he was. The material was provocative. It was emotionally challenging, but it was interesting. But what really caught my attention more than anything was the resentment and the bitterness and the anger among my classmates. Keep in mind, I'm around 28, 29. No, actually, scratch that. I'm like 30, 31 at the time. And I'm 10 years older than most of the students in there. Kind of the only one with life experience, work experience outside of, blah, blah, blah. And they really hated, I don't want to be unfair, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't get the impression that they hated white people. They hated that whole really left narrative of the system is rigged. And I'll explain what CRT is very quickly in a second, because this is part of the story of how I get to host Searching for Political Identity. So it really blew me away. The attitudes of the students. Say what? So, and this is during the pandemic. We had masks on. We were just getting let back into school. This is 2021, 2022. So it was really just a crazy time for me. I'm studying critical race theory. Wait a minute. I thought this system was beautiful. Now I'm being told it's horribly corrupt and slanted for white people still. And we have masks on. And what is going on? So I launched the podcast during that. final year, thinking that I would connect with thought leaders from diverse backgrounds and figure out, do I want to continue voting for Democrats? And that process culminated in my vote 2 days ago for Donald Trump. I did it. So we can get into all that and how so it was a long, kind of tortured 3-year process of hosting people. And,
Mhm.
I can get into the details on it later, but ultimately with the Kennedy endorsement, I said, you know what, screw it. I'm not going to fight it anymore. And CRT was a huge part of that. So that is
Yeah.
the story.
Um, I'm so excited to talk to you for like the next hour. It's
Good.
you've no idea, but
Good.
I can give you some background about me, and just so you know, like where I'm coming from, what my biases are, and all those things. Um, and then I would love for you to explain CRT because you're probably one of like 5 people online that actually know what this is, and you can actually really explain it well in depth. So, who I am, real quick, just so you know. I'm from a small town in Kansas, about an hour south of Kansas City, but even about like a 10-15 minute drive south of like where I went to school. I'm just surrounded by like cows on one side, horses on the other. Not like quite Farmville, but getting there. And I'm one of the only minorities in the whole town. My dad definitely leaned right, my mom leaned left, but they were pretty apolitical. Like I would have no idea as a kid. Um, and then my brothers kind of grew to be what I have 3 older brothers. One was a political guy. Um, and then the next one, I'm the youngest of them all. The next one is like libertarian right. And then the next one down is like left. I'd say used to be way more on the left.
Hmm.
But just, left at this point. And when I kind of figured out who I was politically, because I didn't know there was such a thing as actual Democrats when I was like a child. I was like, people, they're not Democrats. Like it seemed like a unicorn to me, just for being a small kid. And then you get to high
Gotcha.
school and you take these government classes and these politics classes, and we took the political compass test.
Mhm.
And all the kids were putting their dot wherever they landed on those 4 squares. And I literally landed right in the center. I'd say I probably shifted a tiny bit from that. It's from this point, but I landed right in the center. And that was kind of a point for me where I was like, whoa. And kind of hindsight, looking at my family, my parents, my brothers, like that can make sense. Other people like I respect and talk to the most, and like true role models doing super cool things in life. Like okay, this actually kind of makes sense. And I just kind of got more interested in it. And I'd say, especially towards the end of college, um, got more interested in it. Hardcore anti-Trump guy in 16. Strangely, now I went through a period. We'll get into RFK because I do have a lot of sentiment for RFK. I'd love to talk about that at some point, and that's what kind of opened me up a bit to the right. But I ended up now. I'd say I have less emotion involved in it. I was 19 when Trump won that first election.
Hmm.
And I've kind of come to understand why, how people get there and how they vote for him. And politics going to learn more here today, but I have less emotion involved in it. I'd say I'm harder not for Trump than I was in 16 from a logical standpoint. And again, we can get into that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But that is my bias. So I just think that's important for you to know and for the listeners to know. I've actually never told my listeners.
What's amazing is that I had no idea. Yeah. So good for you for kind of keeping it close to your vest.
Oh, thank you. I like to think I'm very open-minded. I mean, by the end of this podcast, you'll have a good idea of who I am, I hope. And and I also think it's important to say, hey, here is my bias, because we all have a bias. And one of the things I find infuriating about a lot of people kind of in this online space, but even offline, is like they're unable to admit they have a bias. And it's like, we all have it. We all have an upbringing. We all have a bias. We all have a certain way of seeing the world and how we think and what we want to be true. So just keep that in mind, the story of Troy. It hopefully gives you kind of an idea of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, that's great.
As we go through this conversation. On that note, you went to law school. CRT was an elective that you took, and it really opened your eyes. Can you explain what CRT is? And let's start there.
Yeah. Critical race theory is the idea that American culture, society right now is It's called, the word they use is anti-objective. It's not, so if it were objective, it would be the society that the Republicans think we're living in, where, hey, we had the Civil Rights Act and it's a colorblind society. Really, colorblind and objective can be almost interchanged. But it's the idea that society is not neutral, even though we passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which opened the doors on paper, right, to all these traditionally marginalized communities into our American system. And people who don't believe in critical race theory think we're done. That's great. And merit and bootstraps. And that's where we are. And at least culturally, not in terms of maybe economics on the left, but certainly in terms of racial divides or anything like that, they would say, no, where we are now is a neutral society, colorblind society. So CRT says society is not objective, therefore it must be deconstructed and reconstructed. It's the idea that, so here's what it is. I can extrapolate on that sentence. So the one sentence is, it's society is anti-objective, therefore it must be deconstructed and reconstructed. Another way to say that is traditional American society is a white society. It's infused with white values such as private property and minimal government. That's the claim. And that, bottom line is, Black people, non-white people, don't share that culture and shouldn't have to live in it. That's kind of what it is in its simplest terms. And so that gets packaged into something called critical process. And I don't know if many people who study critical race theory end up getting critical process. I don't know if it's just an invention of my very talented and deep into this work professor. But critical process is basically the roadmap for how a judge or a justice would use critical race theory in their opinions to shape laws, to shape the culture. And so the critical a judge or a justice, the idea of critical process is, who is a critical race theorist who thinks that society is slanted to white people and something needs to be done, something radical needs to be done about it. They would say, in their opinion, there's a formula to follow for every judicial opinion. This is the outsider value. Highlight it, talk about it, and make sure it gets recognized. If nothing else, for dignity, recognize the outsider value, the minority value, and try to shape the law around that value. And over time, change the culture of society. So that is the game going on.
Sorry, when you say value, yeah, is like the value by like viewpoint or moral stance? What do you mean exactly by
cultural
value?
Cultural value.
Cultural values. Okay.
Yes. And so there's thank you. Good. Thank you. Critical race theory is the idea that, what's another way to say that it's not objective society is to say that it's white. It's white. And there is such a thing as white culture, and there is such a thing as Black culture, and they will address the minority views and like the Thomas Sowell, the Clarence Thomases. They will call that the minority Black voice, and therefore that the majority Black culture says that it's struggling in this society, and it shouldn't have to be this way. And society's got to be, the onus is on society to be transformed, not the Black community. To the extent that there's a problem, there may be a problem in the Black community.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yes.
More or less kind of what I thought it was. I remember CRT, I don't remember the time period anymore, but when it really blew up in the media space.
It was exactly when I was studying it. DeSantis was all over the news fighting it.
Yes.
Another thing that made it very interesting. And then also in the second course, the following semester, Justice Jackson was going through the nomination process, and Ted Cruz again was grilling her. And so I like to tell people I was playing the role of Ted Cruz in that class. And one, because the class needed the balance. It's actually a relevant part of the story. One, because the class needed the balance. And two, because I actually felt that way. The classmates, they were vicious. They were in vicious agreement with my very reasonable professor who's laying out these very provocative ideas that society is slanted. So it was, I'm not going to use the word traumatizing, but it was a little traumatizing. And what's interesting is, as diverse as the class was, and it was women, all different, demographics, there was like one Black guy And he was the only other one like me representing the Ted Cruz view, and he was on his way to be a prosecutor representing the system that everyone was railing against. So interesting, that conflict, it started. So who am I? What do I want to, do I still want to vote for Democrats? Because this seems to be such a big part of their platform. I was always uncomfortable with identity politics. I would say that it's my opinion that the Democrats have always leaned into identity politics.
I agree.
And so coming from that background of always to be concerned about the impoverished, the marginalized, and particularly with the Black community, you know, Reformed Jews. I don't know if you're a Reformed Jew, but, you know, there's that connection, that kind of bond between the two communities in a sense. So not wanting to betray that at all, I just said, wow, this doesn't seem right. It seems like a victim mentality indulgement. Not to say that you can't get it. Look, here's what I said about it. Put the critical race theory glasses on. You're going to learn something. And that's great, because there is history in there and there's important lessons, but it's not just history. It's a prescription for action, a deconstruct and reconstruct into any prison, you know, cops, anything. And some of them, by the way, might end up having net positive results, but it's the idea to keep those glasses on. Everything is slanted towards white people, and look at any sector of society and say, we got to reform it radically, not just little. So to the extent that it's a conversation starter and gets you to understand potentially some things that are still happening today, great. But to keep those glasses on all the time and to frame every conversation that way, I think it's ultimately harmful.
I agree. I think this is kind of relevant to political news. The Ta-Nehisi Coates, man. I didn't read
what's
the whole
going
book.
on with him? Who is he, and what's going on with him again?
So I learned who he was because he was going on a tour. Here we go. I'm going on the Jew angle already.
Good.
But
we should get to the Jew angle, so lean in.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge part of my identity. Especially like, I don't know. It's one of those things. I'll talk about Dave Smith later on. Like, Dave Smith says as a Jew a lot, and anyways, you know, I wish that wasn't true. He does the as a Jew argument. I mean, I hate that, because except for when you say that, I would have no idea that you were. Like, I don't feel like that's at the core of your identity, at least not your political identity. Like, it doesn't, again, what was at the core of his political identity is libertarianism, you know, and which is today's libertarianism is almost a form of isolationism. I mean, pulling back pretty heavy as far as military and all these things go. Yeah. You know, not wanting to be involved in any sense. And that's the core. If you listen to him for hours and hours and hours, you'll never get any hint that he's a Jew, except when he talks about Israel and says, "Hey, I wish this wasn't the case," right? And
fascinating point that I'll come back to. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that stuff like that kind of goes me the wrong way. But like,
what about this Coates guy?
Sorry. Yeah, I got off topic.
No, good.
Coates guy. So I didn't know who he was before he started doing this tour. Going on John's story. Eventually goes on Trevor Noah. He's doing this whole tour. And I hear about this book, My Message, with The Message. And I didn't read the whole book. It's kind of broken up into parts. But one of the parts is about Israel. So I read that part. And it's about, I don't know, 90 to 100 pages, somewhere in there. And the way that he was looking at the world, I mean, it's just CRT. Now you explain CRT to me, like, oh, it's just CRT. He went to Israel for a 10-day trip. And if you go to Israel, as you may know, on one trip with one specific group, you can come away thinking it's the best place on the planet for human beings of any kind. If you go on another trip, depending on what group you're going with, you'll walk away thinking this place is horrible. It's apartheid. It's all these bad things. He goes on that trip, and you know, kind of to confirm his own biases of, well, I'm a young black man from Baltimore, seeing everything through the lens of race, and he very much does. It's one, I would say he lives with CRT glasses, and he looks at Israel and says Palestinians are black, Jews are white, and sees it that way, and he even relates it back to his childhood in Baltimore. And then it's just kind of full of fabrications or just half truths. One is like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, how anyone can go in there, but not anyone can go to the Western Wall. You have to be Jewish. And it's the exact opposite, actually, is that only Muslims can go to Al-Aqsa. And one of the things that helped spark the Intifada was one of the Israeli officials going to Al-Aqsa. and anyone go to the Western Wall. Anyone at all can go to the Western Wall. So like that's a lie he says, and then there's kind of these half truths, and he really forms a whole thing, and it just kind of it could come out to seem like okay, this guy's kind of extremist, knowing nothing about his background. It does feel like okay, this guy, definitely ultra leftist, just painting this horrible, the worst view on earth you could think of Israel, and eventually someone on CBS, and I forget his name, but it's horrible. He gutsy to do it. He actually said that he's like, "Hey, this is a admiration tour is going on all these left wing shows," and he goes on CBS. It's like, "Hey, if I didn't know who you were, take the title off and take the name off of it. Like, I would think this is an extremist writing this book." Mm-hmm. And he kind of like asked him some hard questions. Nothing too too hard, crazy, but just kind of hard questions. It was admiration, and it set the left aflame. He had to apologize to people at CBS. And this guy goes on Trevor Noah, and Trevor Noah's like, I was never been offended, never often offended on someone's behalf. I was so offended. Like, and I'm just like mind blown. Like, dude, I watched this interview, like Tony somebody, but I watched this interview. Like, it was just it was a fair interview, and it wasn't like this super bad thing. And eventually, he gets into a whole thing where he could see himself participating on October 7th. And that blows up. And so then I got to look into this guy more. And he actually, when he's writing about America, it's very similar. After 9/11, what he wrote was he just couldn't really find empathy in his heart, even for like the police, the firemen, white, black, whatever. And it kind of goes all back to what we were saying of the way that he views the world. And there's these CRT glasses. And it's just like there's an oppressor.
The Squad. It makes me think. It makes me think some people did something. Yes, exactly.
And I think that's kind of. I would assume. I have to get back to you now. That's who that is.
So are you? So you're from the left. You would say you're a left-leaning guy.
I'd say I'm of the left. I think in high school, once I started thinking about it, when I saw that dot in the middle, I was like, "That's crazy." Saw that dot in the middle. I started thinking about it. One of my brothers is gay, and I definitely like, okay, I'm for gay rights.
Sure.
And I kind of always thought of myself as socially liberal, socially to the left, economic to the right, which I think I pretty much still do.
So you're not, but you're not leaning. You're not inclined to vote for Trump at this moment.
No. I can get into that too. But,
yeah. May I ask why?
Yeah. So I'll give you the story of 16. I was like, I would call it, if you said I had Trump derangement syndrome in 16 or 15, I'd say that's fair. Because I really thought, okay, this guy could cause World War III.
Oh, wow.
Like I was like, this is just crazy to me. This is like a game show guy. Maybe he's good at business, maybe he's not, but like, he's a game show guy. He's funny.
Exactly.
Like, people want to vote for him because he's funny. And I was like, what is going on?
I'll tell you what, So I have family on the East Coast who are in real estate, and they know Trump, and I don't know their current relations, but I know that history, what I got in my ear growing up was that he wasn't a serious guy. He wasn't a good guy. He was a joke. I come from very much of that background. He was always selling something, selling a mattress, a knife, steaks, water.
Let's say he still is, yeah, but yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. 100%. And I didn't vote for him either. I remember walking around a grocery store. Remember I said I talked to my dad about politics, big part of our relationship. I'm in California. He's in Jersey. I'm walking around a Ralph's. Wow, he just came down the elevator. And wow. And I said, you know what, Dad? Obviously, I'm not going to vote for the guy, but I'll tell you, there's something there. That's basically what I said to my dad. I said there was something there. And my dad is completely grossed out and freaked out and terrified of Donald Trump and thinks he's a horrible person and feels bad for him. So huge case of TDS, I would say. But I get all of that. And I'm sorry to cut you off from your story.
I'm happy. Yeah,
but
I want to hear it. Yeah.
I've, through all the things that we'll eventually get to, and I do want to come back to the Jewish thing. It's very important.
I always get back to it.
Yep. So there's several things to talk about and how we got there and how I got here. But ultimately, I've said, you know what? Despite his reputation in the past, I just got to judge him by the results. And so the results don't do it for you, huh? Of his administration compared
honestly,
to what we got?
So the result, there's things like I get into about the results, good and bad, and I'd say good and bad about Biden as well. I think a lot of the smears on both sides have to do with COVID, about specifically the economy, and I think that's just kind of unfair judgment on both sides. But like, I honestly I could talk to you about like one of the things I didn't like about Trump's term was we had a great economy from 16 to COVID, which COVID is not his fault.
Right.
But we were running all-time high deficits. Why are we doing that? And like, I am a CPA. I don't work as a CPA, but I am a CPA, and like, you want to run a successful business, keep costs down. You know, Amazon's insane about costs. Like one of the stories of Jeff Bezos was he would take the light bulbs out of the vending machine. Like insane about saving, and like to me that's just kind of like a red flag. But honestly,
that's interesting.
It really has nothing to do with the guy. I'd be lying if I said like this is, you know, like it's really not. And it's despite I think he's great for Israel, at least in the short term.
Right.
Which the short term is kind of matters at the moment. And if he does win, I will have a personal silver lining of, okay, this is better for Israel. In my opinion, it'd be hard for me to be convinced otherwise, obviously, on that one. He's again in the short term, but to be honest, like I really kind of warmed up to him as I soured on the left, and I soured on the left very hard in like 2021 because being Jewish. And I can get into that later on, but what it was for me was not just January 6th, but the more I've learned about everything that led up to that moment, I know for a fact, and we can spend time here, I know for a fact at this point, this guy tried to steal an election in a way that is different than I've ever seen in history, certainly in my lifetime. And it's so un-American that everything else just falls apart. Like, I have a friend who, like, I was even able to, he's voting for Trump. I was able to convince him. I laid out all the evidence. I'm happy I laid out all the evidence here. Like, hey, this is different. You can't say like, this isn't just like getting in voters. Like, there's winning unethically, which I say there's voting laws that can go either way. There's, you know, if you think people are shipping in migrants to vote, okay, there's winning unethically and there's stealing post-election. And I convinced my buddy it's voting for Trump. Like, yeah, I know he stole it. Like, this is different.
Tried to. Yeah. So, you know what's funny is I go into this. Yeah. So when I made my big announcement 7-8 weeks ago that I was voting for Trump after all this mental masturbation, I gained all these followers, right? And it's been really fascinating. We can talk about that later.
Yeah.
But about, 2-3 weeks ago, it occurred to me that I never really gave a deep dive into the election challenge. I mean, I pay attention to the news daily, but I never really did that. And I said, oh, shit. And I started to post about it like, oh, I guess I maybe really should address this because that is the one legitimate obstacle, the big one. I rail against people. I say, of course, he's not Hitler. Well, okay, that's crazy. And I think it is crazy.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I do have a comment about that later on, but please finish.
But the fact that he tried to, a threat to democracy. Okay, let's talk about that. And what I actually say is, I acknowledge that he probably did illegal, but what's crazy is, for me, the context is so distorted and so biased and so unfair against him. Even though I'm not a defender. I thought it was a joke, but in my opinion, having been through his presidency while in law school and just whatever, I really think he was treated unfairly. And not that it justifies it or makes it right, but when I look at it that way, I'm able to give a clean slate in my own mind and say, okay, let me just look at results. So
I understand that. When you say just look at results, I get that, especially if you're a single issue voter on something, or like, there's things that I understand. So like to finish that story I was telling, like I convinced my buddy, like, hey, this was stolen. And he goes, yeah, no, you're right. He's just better for Israel. I'm still voting for him. Like, I just don't care. He literally said, I just don't care.
Yeah.
And there's people I know that are like that. And like, I'll kind of walk through actually, I do think he was treated unfairly throughout his presidency.
Right.
I think he was treated unfairly when he was running the first time.
And during the election, I think.
Yeah. But ironically, like in my mind, at least, it's like, okay, this all came to fruition now. Like everything that we were like, he's being treated unfairly, kind of earned it in these few months here. And it's just like,
Mm.
And it was very simple. And
In hindsight, yeah,
yeah, and like this
retroactively earned it, which is a problem.
retroact. Yeah, thank
Which
you.
is a
Great word
problem.
there. And yeah, and that really does freak me out. Not because I think he's Hitler,
Right.
but because I'm going to lay out a story for you. And this is actually the story. I hope it's engaging for you and for the audience, because this is the story that actually convinced my buddy. With hopefully, I mean, I don't have to give all the details, but I'll give a lot. I'm not saying this guy's Hitler. I don't think he's Hitler. I think he's just kind of like a narcissistic dude, different, a generational talent as far as marketing and like being funny, like a generational type figure. Truly, like that's what I think he is. However, if there is a 20-year-old to 40-year-old man, it's probably going to be a man that does have the goal of taking over the world or destroying America's democracy. Let's focus more on that. Destroying America's democracy. If I'm that guy, per se, I know how to do this now. I know exactly how to do this now. And say I have the means, right? And say I have the family name or the money or whatever it is. I'm going to start my political career by being a super anti-establishment, populist, like as much as I can. How am I going to do that? Screw it. The president isn't even from here. That was the first thing he did. Was the president isn't even from here. And I'm going to go against every establishment thing. And that way my base of these millions of people that are going to love me, off the bat, they're going to believe anything I say. It doesn't matter. I have a base that believes the president wasn't born here. They're going to believe anything I say. As long as they don't step out of line too much on policy things they might care about. But anti-establishment to the core. You run on that. Somehow he won. That's a whole story in itself.
Right.
Like, what impressive.
Incredible.
But,
yes.
Yeah, honestly, an extremely impressive run. But now I have power. Here's what I'm going to do now. Now that I'm in power. I'm going to tell everybody, hey, there's a way that these people are going to cheat. They're going to steal it. I'm actually going to get more votes, and they're going to steal it. In this case, maybe in the future case, mail-in voting is a scam. They're going to completely scam you through mail-in voting. I'm going to convince my entire base to not mail-in vote. He also got a little.
I'm not comfortable with it. He was priming his base to say,
yes,
this is not legit because when you go to sleep, I'm ahead, and when you wake up, I'm
exactly.
behind. And we
yes.
knew that the mail-in ballots were going to be for Democrats by a huge margin anyway. So I never thought January 6th freaked me out, and I never supported his election challenge. But all things considered, particularly with the Kennedy endorsement, I was a Kennedy guy up until the endorsement.
Yeah.
I said, you know what? I'm going to give him a pass. That is in a sense crazy, and I understand that.
Okay. As long as you can acknowledge that, because the thing is, like, it wasn't just
these are crazy times.
Yes, they are.
And I think I think he's been treated in a crazy fashion.
I agree. However, it just doesn't, to me, that doesn't excuse the behavior of, and it's not only the lie about the mail-in voting, which is pretty bad, and it is a way to try and steal an election. It's like get the people to believe, hey, I actually won.
Yeah.
But he also sent 79 fake electors in to try and pass as the actual electors. Because obviously we're voting for electoral college. He did it in 7 different states. He tried to weaponize the DOJ. He did it on live TV. Like he's just this cult of personality that any other person would just like, hey, this is crazy. Like, this isn't okay. And it's super un-American. And because of that, even if I align with him on every policy, which I actually, he's to the right of me on Israel. Like, he's so pro-Israel. Like,
right.
But like, when that's one of my most important policies, foreign-wise at least, and federally, definitely up there. And we align pretty well. But even if I align with him on everything, it's just for me, it's like, I'm an American. I really believe in this country. I think the foundation, the founding fathers, like, I think the Constitution, all these things are great. I can't vote for that. And like, I just physically could not get my name to check myself to check that box next to his name.
It's funny. It's like, if you think about Israel, just generally, and you think about Donald Trump as a political candidate, you could say for any issue, your foundational belief on it is so instructive. You either believe that the Jews have a right to be in Israel or you don't. and everything's going to flow from that. You either believe that Donald Trump was a victim of a very sophisticated and malicious intelligence operation, or you don't. And I'd be lying to you if I said that I don't believe that he was. And I said what I said about the election. I have nothing further to say.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And yet I've still come around. Remember, I wasn't a supporter until 7 weeks
Yeah.
ago, man.
Yeah. No, I know. So you're there not really for Trump. There's a guy named Holding Quilta. He's a great follow, especially for someone like yourself.
I know. Yeah. He's amazing.
Yeah. So I had him on my old podcast before I was hosting for Maker's Bar. Great guy. I'm so excited to see him when he's 40. Like, he's 23 now. Like,
It's
he's
crazy. It's scary.
yeah. He's going to be. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's going to be awesome. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Here it is.
So yeah, he already is great. And I had him on because I was a big RFK guy. I definitely say I'm not cold. I'm still warm on him. I still like RFK, but I've kind of, as I've listened to opposition of him, of people like, hey, this is kind of why this is crazy, and I've listened to the stories of, oh, okay, he's not as tethered to the truth as I thought he was. I really thought he was this huge truth teller, and I think he was treated massively unfairly. And I think that he is right on a handful of things. I liked him a lot. I just thought this is a good guy. I like his push for health. And I still like that push for health. So I understand that. So how did you get into RFK? And what is it that about him that's it's so strong that it can, like, his endorsement of somebody can turn into your endorsement?
So, coming off of this experience in law school studying critical race theory, is really thirsty for a leadership and vision and guidance politically. I mean, that's what it was all about. And so then comes Vivek onto the scene, and he's amazing. And he's early 2023, he launches his campaign, and it's all about tearing down critical race theory, how meritocracy, this system, I'm a minority, I'm thriving, anybody can. That's my whole thing. I loved it. And he really caught I said, this is a guy I could vote for. Okay. But when he started to fizzle out, he really didn't fizzle, but he just wasn't going to overcome step out of Trump's shadow. He was extraordinary. He rose to 15% out of nowhere. When he fizzled out, Kennedy started to rise, and it was just seeing his long form podcasts and respecting his leadership in the sense that he was always speaking with a unified tone. He's speaking to both sides with such depth and insight and leadership and courage. I just really respected it. And I thought, this is what you do. While Biden, all due respect to him, there was no primary. We had a million reasons to question his competency. I don't ever say, by the way, that he has a health disorder, Alzheimer's or anything like dementia. I don't go that far. I don't say horrible things about Kamala other than I don't find her impressive and never did. But the contrast between Kennedy and Biden was just extraordinary. And I said, okay, so I'm searching because I couldn't get with Biden again, just on the results, the results and the posturing to the woke left. Not that I don't want to be like a dramatist about it, but there's some toleration. It's there. Almost being guided to it. Like, does he have his own values? Like, is he listening to his granddaughter on everything? Like, is his granddaughter president? You know what I mean? But so the contrast, I really became attracted to Kennedy. Searching for something. There was Vivek, now it's Kennedy. And I really got behind Kennedy, not everything, but I just respected him and said, this is my guy. I can support Kennedy, a guy from the left traditionally, while effectively supporting Trump. It was a perfect out, right? I don't have to take moral responsibility. I'm good. So that's what brought me in, his interviews.
Any in particular? I watched so many of his.
Yeah, not really. Just the fact that he was doing them. And then Trump was doing them. Trump started doing them. And I said, okay, another reason. And then they started shooting Trump. I mean, it was just one thing after another, but the endorsement was huge. Really gave me psychological permission to just say, hey, I don't disagree with Trump on most things. Sure, there are things that he says at times that make me go, and I wouldn't say, or this and that, but no longer can I deny that I think he's the better option right now. And yes, it's unfortunate, to say it lightly, what happened with the election challenge. It's unfortunate the way he was treated. And I will be judged in my own little way
We all are.
for right
Yeah,
for this opinion. But
that's
you know what it is, Troy? It's like maybe it's because I came out of that critical race theory classroom and I was feeling attacked. And I'm 75% Jewish.
I
And so I was defense posturing. So I could then relate to Trump. And suddenly I'm seeing it from his view and seeing, wait, does he actually represent traditional American culture that I like? And is he actually fighting the woke mob? You know?
I think I think that's the appeal. I think the appeal, Vivek does not appeal to me at all, to be honest. But I think the appeal of Vivek, RFK, Trump is so many people, white men, or white adjacent even,
Right.
were feeling attacked by society.
Yes.
And you kind of have this guy standing up for you, like, hey, no, this is what is going on. And there's also just a lack of trust in the establishment, which is earned.
Troy, sorry to interrupt, but the white people in the white people in America, no quotes, they're getting pounded economically over the years with trade deals, right? And then they're getting pounded socially, culturally with the critical race theory. They needed someone to stick up for them. It resonated.
Exactly. I agree. It resonated. I think it resonated strong. And this is actually like how I started to sour on the left so hard. Not that I was like hugely political before. I was a kid when Obama got voted in. Trump Hillary campaign was the first campaign I could have voted. I did not vote at 19. I lived in Kansas. It was going to go for Trump, and I was like, yeah, whatever. 19. And
Sure.
so I wasn't like very strongly committed one way or the other. So my only strong commitment was 16 hard against Trump. 20, I was honestly like, I don't know. Because I definitely softened to Trump, and like I think he was treated unfairly. Ended up earning it, but he was treated unfairly. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and then 24, I'm also like, okay, I just can't do Trump again. Less emotional about it, but again, it's like after what I've seen and know, I just like I can't know what I know.
So there's no cancellation. There's no pass coming from you. You're not giving them a pass.
I'm trying to undermine America's democracy and doing it in such a way that if somebody was Hitler, again, he's not. I know he's not.
Sure.
If somebody was, I want to destroy America's democracy, writing the playbook for them on how to do it, I just can't.
I hear you. Look, I hear you. On the other hand, to play devil's advocate, all the defenders now see the playbook as well, so it can be guarded against, perhaps. And there is a great irony in Trump. My word, gun to my head. What's your word to describe Trump? Ironic. Yes, he seems to make things better. He's such a piece of shit, right? But and I mean, I say that with a half joke. So, like Giuliani said, who, has fallen off a cliff reputationally, right? But before he did, he said Trump's going to make the press better, and in a way, I think he has. In a perverse way, there's this weird thing going on, this dynamic where
that's
they
interesting.
attack him. Yeah.
Let's talk about this. I don't know if he has. I would say it's a very similar way of how October 7th has made the left better, and it's because it came to a point where it's like there's just no denying that this is extremely biased. But there's something wrong here within journalism. Speaking of Trump, within journalism, there is something wrong here. Like this is so incredibly biased. I thought it was just Fox and MSNBC, but it turns out it's CNN, it's ABC, and you can still, to Trump's credit, you can still see it in the debate, like the ABC debate. It was. You could tell the moderators were against them. And it's like, you don't need to do that. They stopped.
It's funny is I got a lot of crap from followers for saying that I thought they were neutral.
You thought they were neutral? Oh, see, I'm not a Trump guy. I did not think
I know. It's so interesting. Isn't that funny?
That is
funny. Just said, he was the president. There was a lot of controversial things to ask him about. And so they followed up a little more and they had tougher questions. I thought it was sensible, but I got grilled for that. I got killed for that, dude.
Well, yeah. I mean, considering the following that you have of RFK and the Trump, like that would make sense. Good for you though, on just saying what you believe. And
so you thought they were biased?
I thought they were, but anywho, I just think the late teens, 2010s, the late 2010s. I just think everyone had to wake up to that, and everyone did. I don't think there's anyone's like, oh yeah, this is just all super super trustworthy. I think that there's a bad part of that, which is I don't think that alternative media has proven itself super trustworthy.
Right.
And there's still at least some sort of safeguards, safe rails in place. As much as I hate them, at like the Washington Post, the New York Times, or I'm trying to think of ones that I actually truly just don't like. Even like Amnesty International, like as much as I think, okay, these are so biased, but there's still guardrails. There's still something there in place, and with this alternative media, it's just as biased, and there's just no guardrails there. And all of a sudden, you can see some of the biggest influencers in the country,
right?
Political
No,
influencers,
no
like literally being paid by Russia, whether they knew it or not. Literally being paid by Russia, like they're step for step in line with Russian propaganda, whether they know it or not. And it's like, this is what happens in alternative media. So I think a good solution is just new establishment. So the free press, I think, is great. For example, I think they're actually probably my bias, my choice. I think they're the best one I've seen out recently, doing great work there. But so again, in a sense, yeah, he woke everyone. Sorry to wrap that all up. He woke everybody up to that, right? Like Trump woke. I think if it wasn't for Trump, I wouldn't have woken up to that. At least not as soon as I did. I think they did wake things up that way. And in a similar sense, kind of pivoting to the Jewish Israel topic at this point, I noticed the cultural rot in the left in 2021. If I had my phone on me, which I don't, I'd pull up an Instagram post of something I said. I can send it to the screenshot to you. Okay, all these people that I proudly stood with of like stop Asian hate, my body, my choice, or the Black Lives Matter, like not necessarily the organization, but like the whole concept behind it. Like, I think these are all great things. And I saw people every day on Instagram, like my friends. Twitter's a little different, right? Twitter's more a battlefield. Instagram's your friends. So people every single day posting for these things, reading books. But then when Jews start coming under attack in 2021, dead silent. Even after some people, some left-wing Jews leftist Jews, not left-wing, leftist Jews, who can get away saying it as a Jew, are telling Jews to shut up. And it's like, man, this is a problem. This is a big anti-Semitic kind of month in 2021. I post about it, and it's like I'm trying to wake everybody up, and it starts waking me up. I start looking into Israel, Palestine. I start looking into Jewish history. What is going on here? And basically, I'm screaming for 3 years about what October 7th woke the left up to. I think it's now undeniable. I know it is. It is undeniable. The left is a huge anti-Semitism problem. As far as who is the bigger one right now, it's the left. And
huge part of this culture shift, the political shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that the right doesn't have anti-Semitism problems. I mean, the third biggest podcast in the world right now is Candace Owens, and it's built purely off anti-Semitism. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but there's clearly a bigger problem with that right now, and it's something I was kind of screaming about. I think all my friends, Jewish or otherwise, like nah. October 7th woke that up, and everyone's unfortunately unproven right, and it's just like you don't want to be proven right in that way. You'd rather everyone just think you're brilliant, just come naturally. But I see that happen, and it's similar in that sense. It's similar in that fashion, where it's like this horrible thing happened. Going back to Julian's thing, I'm like, this guy's bad dude. This horrible thing happened, but it woke people up. It kind of changed American politics for the better, because now all of a sudden, Richie Torres, who was always pro-Israel, gets a way bigger following. Brianna Wu, I know who this was, and like if it wasn't for her, I'd be fully out in progressive politics. I already kind of was before October 7th because of this whole thing, because of the whole Jewish problem they had. But she's pulling me back into progressive politics. I mean, okay, I can listen to you, I can talk to you. Talking about, I had her on this podcast, and she actually just won the Free Press. I want to have her back on, and I want to talk exclusively about trans rights. Because I want to know more about that from someone that has in-depth knowledge of all these things. Is
she pro or anti?
She's a trans woman. Yeah, and she was progressive. She's a progressive, like single.
She progressed genders. No, I'm kidding.
Single payer healthcare, the whole thing, and just progressive politics. But this happened, and she realized who she was standing next to, and she just, I'm not standing next to this. This is horrible. Like,
That's interesting.
and she kind of just did her research, which I think if most honest human beings, if you're pure, not that we all biases, it's kind of impossible. But if you're just purely unbiased and you went into this Israel Palestine topic, you're gonna end up having sympathy for both. But you're gonna end up being able to see things from an Israeli perspective.
And what is the
And
bottom line? That the Jews have a biblical claim, and with the Holocaust and its creation, it's just a legitimate state, guys. Period. That's
uh,
the bottom line
from which side?
from the Jewish,
Uh,
the
so from the
pro-Israel
Jewish,
side.
so here's now we're getting into my expertise. How much time do you have, by the way?
I have I could do another 30.
Another. Okay, great.
I could go for that long.
Because we're probably gonna do this Jewish stuff for now.
Let's do it.
To my followers, people that I assume I have some loyal followers on here, given the view counts. I hope you're enjoying this. This is definitely different than most conversations, and I appreciate you, Brian, for having this.
Likewise.
So I don't know if everyone knows the story, because I didn't learn about. I again, only Jew I knew until I was like 15, summer camp for a year.
Was a cow.
Yeah, like, that was it. And like, so I didn't have like, hey, you should love Israel for this reason. I grew up not knowing of the Jews. A kid that went to my high school was shot at the JCC in the town north of mine, my town basically, by a Nazi, and like, that kind of woke me up a bit. And
Wow. That's crazy.
it is that
He was
it's very
killed?
sad. He was killed, him and his grandfather, unfortunately, which is horrible death.
Wow.
And and like that kind of makes you think about things. That's kind of how my Jewish broader Jewish
How old were
identity is
you?
growing up.
How old
I
were you?
was 17. I was 17. And I was always proud Jew. It was always kind of like my identity. Like, my nickname's Jew when I'm a kid, and I'm the Jewish friend, and like I take great pride in that. And like I liked, Hanukkah for me, I kind of celebrate like Thanksgiving. Like, I'm trying to say everything I'm thankful for every day. And it's not like very like religious, holy world thing. It's just my ethnic identity. Like, I look in the mirror, I looked at
Very
Israelis,
interesting.
I looked in the mirror and I saw me. Like, tannish people. Like, I didn't even, especially as a young child, I had no idea I wasn't directly from there. I'm mostly Ashkenazi, kind of like scattered, 100% Jewish. Mostly Ashkenazi though. As a young kid, I had no idea. I just looked at Israel. Oh yeah, mostly. Yeah, they look like me. And but kid gets killed, and it kind of starts forming my identity more. And I started looking into this more. And then in 2021, looking into it even more. And all that to say this, and I was like a 2-minute rant there. To the story of Israel, to me, in 1880, Jews got very scared. Some of them had this forward thinking, happened to be right in the end. Forward thinking, call it anxiety. Like, hey, the world's changing. I don't think we're going to be okay. Led by Herzl at this time. And I think the only way we're going to be okay is if we go get a state of our own and defend ourselves. These things called states are popping up everywhere. Like, we need one of these. And it's kind of viewed as anti-Semitic amongst the Jews. And it's like, no, like, we're German, we're Russian, we're Egyptian, we're Moroccan, we're whatever. So, and it was kind of anti-Semitic, but enough Jews, not a lot, but enough of them either get ran out of Russia or ran out of some country, at this point European, and they join the old Yishuv, the old Jews. You could call them Palestinian Jews. The term wasn't really used yet, but the Jews had never left. They were always there. They join them, and they end up owning about 6% of the land by the time the Holocaust rolls around, and these crazy anxiety-ridden Jews are proven right. And then after the Holocaust, have you heard of the Harrison Report?
No.
It's a great report.
I don't like reports generally.
There's a video. Habib Gur does a good lecture. I think it's a 2-part lecture on it. I think it is a 2-part lecture on it. He does a good job breaking it down. But what it is it goes to not the prisoner of war camp, but the refugees of war camp after World War II, mind you. And what happened was there were like these basic kind of like drafts of like, hey, here's all these refugees of war. Who wants them? Like, you can repatriate them if you want them. A bunch of Germans that happened to. Also, a bunch of other countries took the Germans in that first round. And in the second round, they took all the other minorities. Either they repatriated them or they got to go to new countries, except for the Jews. There's 250,000 Jews left here. No one wanted them. Jews that tried to go back to the European countries they were from got programmed, got slaughtered. There was literally nowhere for these humans to go. The Harrison report goes in, it's like, hey, what are we going to do with you? That's kind of the whole point. And they ask them. And everyone they interview, 90% of the first choice say, hey, I want to go back to Palestine. I want to go back to Jerusalem. That's it. 98% of them had it in the top two. The number 3 choice, America being the only other one, by the way. America wasn't taking in Jews anymore after the 1920s, as they weren't taking in anybody. And the number 3 choice was the death camps. It was literally death, because they understood what it was that, hey, there's nowhere else for us to go. It's back home to our indigenous homeland, our ancestral homeland. But these weren't like these super religious people. There were like tens of thousands of super religious people already there. Or just anxiety-ridden, either one of the two, right? Religious people already there, but that's not who these people were. They were given a choice of death or Palestine, Jerusalem, Israel, whatever you want to call it. At the time, it is called Palestine. So that was the choice they were given. They went there knowing, and you can read about this in. I hate the quote mining thing. Dave Smith does the quote mining, but you read about it in Ben Gurion, Jabotinsky. They went there knowing, like, hey, we're gonna form a state. We're gonna form a state that wants to be friendly with all the neighbors. You know, we're trying to live in peace. They wrote about it. I won't say the Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence. They don't have a Constitution, but the Declaration of Independence, it's written in there. But they also know, and this is where the quote mining starts. And it's taken super out of context. Is this is going to be a home base for a war that's to come, because there's no way that they're going to accept this. To us, it doesn't matter what our story is. It doesn't matter that we're 250,000 refugees, that it's literally here or death. We have to show up here, and we have to win, or we're going to die. It's win or die.
Right.
And that's the story of Israel. And then around a million.
Fight for your life.
Yeah, around 1 million Mizrahi Jews from Northern Africa and the Middle East end up being expelled out of. So it probably don't even survive without that, which is just insane. And so now it went from, like, if you want to call it a white colonizer thing, which I never would, knowing the actual history of this, it went from that to it's a brown country, and to this day it's majority brown, and it is a brown on brown conflict here. But and the thing is, like, from the Arab perspective, and this is something that Jabotinsky writes about, that Garen writes about, it's like, it doesn't matter what our story is. It doesn't matter that our 250,000 people this is it. Like, they have to choose to fight for their life in Palestine or to die. That is it. Those are their choices. It's not what they're going to see. It's not the story they're going to hear. We're foreigners coming to build a state on their land. Right. No one will accept this. You shouldn't expect the Arabs to accept this.
Right.
And it doesn't help that the allies that supported them at the time were just kind of ironic. Once the war starts, it's the Soviets that actually support them as far as weapons go. But the allies are supporting, like, hey, we want a state of Israel. Are the French and the British, and the French are in Algeria, and the French are saying, hey, we're just like the Zionists. We're no different than the Zionists. And the FLP gets formed in Algeria, which is like, it uses terrorism as a method, and it works. And it's like, okay, this worked. They're just like the Jews. They're just like the Zionists. And if they got rid of the French, we'll do this to get rid of the Israelis, the Zionists. Like, but we're not that. That's not who we are. It's not who the Israelis are. And it's just this huge. Like, I see why they wouldn't accept it in 48. I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, and that's, you're just so dug into this theory, which unfortunately they are. But if you're willing to look at the Jewish perspective, the Jewish story, the real Israeli story of where these people came from, you'd be able to find justice in it. And you'd be able to say, after a century of war and of devastation, mostly for the Palestinians, there's devastation on the Israeli side. I lost a friend on the 7th. There's this devastation on both sides, mostly for the Palestinians. And it's been this horrible, horrible century. And for them in particular, and I think if they were able to hear that story they find some justice in it and say, okay, we can live alongside a Jewish state. Maybe they wouldn't trust the Jewish state, but they could live alongside it, and that's the Israeli perspective. That's the Israeli. It's not. It's really. It was secular. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I was just at someone's house for breakfast the other day. I'm not religious at all, but I joined someone, and there was one of the youngest son's friend who I'd never met, comes from an Orthodox background. He's no longer Orthodox, but I was talking to him about something that I'm about to mention to you, and he brought that point up about how actually they were secular. So I thought mostly, which I thought was really interesting. So you're walking right into a conversation that I just had with these two authors of a book called My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. They're both named Guy. They're both bald. They're both professors. They're both Israeli Americans. And the thesis of their book basically is that there are two groups of Jews, American Jews and Israeli Jews. And as you say, the Israeli Jews are brown. The American Jewish experience is really what you think of when you think of Eastern European Jews, Yiddish and all of this, but this is not what Israel is. Israel is something completely different. And so there's a lot of tension between the two tribes because and they do separate it on Orthodox and Reform, even though many people in Israel are secular. The quip is, I guess in Israel, so they say, I don't go to temple, but the temple I don't go to is Orthodox. It's not the same thing. Reform Judaism, they say, is a vehicle for assimilation. Judaism in Israel is Judaism, what it has been for 3,000 years, as they say, and its goal is to consolidate in Israel, to be Jewish in Israel. But I've always struggled with my Jewish identity. I mean, the podcast, Searching for Political Identity, is deeper than that. And so, my dad is very critical American Jew, left-leaning, very critical of Israel. Not to say that he's ever said that it shouldn't exist, but very critical. And then I have cousins who I respect immensely, who are very damn near Orthodox, extraordinarily strong Israel supporters. So I've kind of always been caught in between, and it was never that important to me. Actually, when I did my birthright trip, I don't know, at this point, it was like 14 years ago. The second to last night on the trip, I'm in Tel Aviv. I call my grandma. I'm having fun. I'm partying. I mean, I'm so lost, man. I don't know what's going on. So unaware, so clueless, just having fun. And grandma goes, "Do you feel like you're home?" I said, "Home? I'm from New Jersey. What are you talking about?" So this sense of identity, I never had it the way you had it, but I've got to confront it. And the other part of this book that they say is not only to highlight the differences between American Jews and Israeli Jews, and the power, how the power within the Jewish community has shifted from America to Israel over the years, and how that dynamic has changed the relationship between the two tribes, the power dynamics. Yeah, very interesting. You've got to read this book. And then I need like 30 book recommendations from you. But I have a few right there, yeah. The other piece of their book is to highlight the relationship between American Jews and the Democratic Party, and why American Jews tend to vote left. Why 70-80% of the time do they vote for Democrats? And the reason is because they practice a Reform Judaism that is about acceptance and tolerance, and tikkun olam, I guess, is the expression, far better than I do, perhaps, what it means, but to do good, to be a good person, right? That's like the ethos of American Judaism, as far as I understand. So, but that's not necessarily like what the Jews in Israel build their lives around. It's the law of Moses rather than the law of to do good. And so,
I would add on to that too. Yeah, actually. There's, and this does come from Haviv Ger. Those two lectures, I would say, they're really great. So I first heard of the Harrison Report and did this deeper dive and everything. He said something that I completely agree with, is that when the Jews came to America, there's a small amount of us, what was it, Massachusetts, Maine? Well, I can't remember exactly where, with George Washington. And they get George Washington letter from like a head rabbi somewhere. It's okay, we'll be good subjects, we'll be loyal. Thanks for letting us be a part of this. Like, basically calling him a king. And he writes back, like, basically, obviously paraphrasing, but basically, hey, this isn't what America is. You're American. not Jewish guest. Like you're an American, as long as you uphold our country and our values, like
Right.
we want you here, and we believe in this idea of liberalism, in the literal sense. This isn't like conservative liberals
Yeah.
today, but in the literal sense of liberalism. And the Jews kind of say, "Oh my God, is this real?" Like, okay, well, if this is real, we better be liberal. Like, we better really mean this. And all of a sudden, the Jewish American culture, which while the Israeli American culture is forming of not Israeli Jewish culture is forming of fight to survive.
Sword, live by the sword.
Live by the name of the
The
game.
authors say,
Yeah.
to be an American Jew means to be part of Reform Judaism, which is to shed your traditional markers of Jewish identity and embrace that society. And the cost of it is you lose a bit of your Jewish identity.
Yeah.
The benefit of living as a Jew in Israel is that you retain your Jewish identity, but you got to live by the sword.
You got to live by the sword. And the Mizrahi Jews come from that culture as well. But that's how they survive. For American Jews to survive, it was okay. Let's be liberal. Like, let's make sure this place is actually liberal. And all of a sudden, American Jews are the most liberal people in the history of the world. Not saying it as a good or bad. I think it's a great thing. I'm not saying it as a good or bad thing. It's just a matter of fact.
Right.
You look at gay rights charts, like who's most pro gay rights things.
Yep.
It's always Jews. Most pro black rights, women's rights, trans rights. The people at the top of that list, or near the top of it, every single time is the American Jewish community. And it makes sense. I mean, you extrapolate it out decades and centuries, that this is just kind of who we became. And it makes sense that, okay, there's still this 75-25 split, as far as the polls say, for Jews voting for Kamala versus Trump, despite I'm pretty hard pressed. I think you have to be locked into anti-Trump or just super pro-left to
not recognize that he'd be better.
Not recognize that he'd be better. Yeah, like
right, exactly.
I think everyone knows that, and like despite that, it's just we're these liberal creatures, and we really believe in that. And while there's a sickness on the left, I also see a cure coming in that I hope liberalism can kind of be recaptured and liberal can be liberal again. I think it is. I think October 7th actually was the thing that kind of made it have to go that way. It's kind of this breaking point where like we have to get over it's identity politics has caused this spike in anti-Semitism. We'll see. We'll see what the future parties look like.
It links to CRT because the two authors named Guy, that they say, look, Israel is a progressive culture by all metrics. I mean, it's productive, progressive place. The one thing is that it's a nation and it's a Jewish nation. And so in the context of critical race theory, where everything is an oppression narrative, the left suddenly views Israel as this negative thing, even though Jews have done, even though there's two tribes, have done so much for liberal rights. So it's pretty interesting. The two guys are really interested to see how American Jews will vote this time. We took a bet right after we stopped recording, and I think the range was like 60, 65 or 68% this time. So maybe a little bit more for Trump. But it's interesting because Trump also, like, I don't believe that he hates gays, for example, or to be a little dramatic about it. But I'm not sure that MAGA, the right, has a problem with these liberal ideas. They just happen to be pro-Israel.
Yeah. So there's a good book, The Ark of the Covenant. I think I'm listening to that one. I think I might have a few hours left in it. I'm listening to like 5 books at once usually because something's gonna grab my attention. But that one's really good, and it talks about why America supports Israel the way that it does, and the way that the guy started the book was like he was gonna write like, "Hey, AIPAC isn't what you all seem to think AIPAC is. It's a huge conspiracy theory around it, and it's not a super powerful thing, and it's a successful lobby." But it's not the reason America is America, and the way that we support Israel is the way we support Israel.
Right.
And it ends up just being this huge book instead, going through the whole history. Not just of America, pre-America. It's a great read. And a lot of America's support is before Israel's even established, is like this evangelical Protestantism. So we're a Protestant country at our founding. We're not a Christian country per se at our founding. We're Protestant. And the way that the Protestants view the Bible, obviously I'm no expert on this, but part of the way they view it is literal. So when they say bless Israel, the Jews are chosen and all these things, which is funny. I've actually met more Christians that believe that than Jews, truly. And
that's what they say in the book, that the Christian right is the biggest ally of Israel, more so than the American Jew.
It's actually true. It is true. I'd say the American Jew. It is very interesting book. You should read it. But the American Jew, like, what pisses me off about these, there's actually no one makes me more angry than the leftist American Jew. The Jew that hates Israel is the most that supports even Hamas at points. And it's like, oh my gosh. No one makes me more angry because it's just a sense of like pure, what's the right word here?
Conflict, internal conflict.
But for them, there's not. It's a pure privilege of like they get to look at Israel and say, this isn't what I want it to be. Because there's flaws in Israel, of course. They have a far right problem. Like if I were to argue against Israel, I would do it better than anybody. Because like all these, the first person to say Israel has a Nazi problem was Jabotinsky, Israel's biggest supporter ever. Before Israel, he'd say, "Oh my gosh, we have a Nazi problem." I wouldn't call it that. I'd say it's a far right problem. There is, and like American Jews look at that and they see that this isn't the ideal that I want it to be.
Right?
Like, no, this is the real world with people.
So my question to you is the far right in Israel, are they not just doing what they need to do to survive, and so they're going to take the slings and arrows, or they're not?
Israel's doing what Israel needs to do to survive. The vast majority of these people, and I've talked to a lot of them across the board at this point, not just Jews, Bedouins, Druze. I've even talked to a couple of Christians. I've talked to a handful of Palestinians. I'd like to get Palestinians on this show. It's been harder to do that. It's easier to get on Twitter Space, where it's not like face to face and less time. We have to work out the time and all that. But it's most of them, like they're doing what they have to do. But there was a far right, and I don't know the percentage. I hate to guess, but I'm gonna guess like 5% maybe. That they're super, super religious. And there's terrorism. And usually it is dealt with, from what I've seen. Usually it is dealt with properly by the authorities, but not always. And there's terrorism. There's settler terrorism, and not most, the minority of the settlers, but that does exist. And it gets ignored at times because Israel has to focus on surviving. Specifically now, the West Bank is or Judea Samaria, depending on who you are. Israelis get mad at me when I say that. West Bank, not all of them, but like far right people would definitely be mad at me for saying that. Which it is a ridiculous name. Real quickly on that, you gotta rename it something else. The West Bank is a military name. It's what Jordan called it for military purposes. No one's a West Bankian. You can be a Gazan and Palestinian, or a Kansan and American. If the Jayhawk can give it away, Kansan and American, like, you could like. Anywho, that's a whole other topic. But like, the far right in Israel is an issue, and I think they're seeing a ton of it. American Jews from Haaretz, Haaretz writes for a foreign audience at this point because they realize they lost the culture war inside Israel, especially now, because like the far right's going to get away with things as Israel focuses on survival. And while Israelis aren't suicidal from their birth, that's kind of the whole thing. Is that we're not suicidal. I don't have to convince you of my legitimacy. They're going to focus on what they need to focus on. I'm very happy that they are. And as a result, like, that there is going to be more of that terrorism that's allowed to get away with, especially as like, what if this guy is a vigilante? You know, what if like there's a vigilante problem of, hey, these people are, maybe they're planning to attack or something, or even maybe you just make it up in your head, but you believe it. Like, hey, this Palestinian over here, like, he's gonna come attack us, so I'm gonna go drive him out of his home first.
Right.
And it's a vigilante problem, and like, it does exist, but I think that's all they're focused on, all they're seeing, and all of a sudden Israel isn't. And I've talked to like people like this, Peter Beinart, someone talked about my old podcast. I don't know if he'd ever talk to me again, to be honest. I hope he would, but and like people like that, like Israel isn't what I want it to be. So therefore it's awful and it's not legitimate. And Israelis are just, yeah, this is insane that I have to say I'm legitimate. Even if they exist. Germany never had anyone argue that, hey, Germany's not legitimate. We never had to argue for the legitimacy.
And there's a through line, man, with the criticism. I don't know if it's a perfect fit, but America has faults. It had, a lot of problems, especially back in then. But we don't need to undo it. That's not the appropriate response. You can look at the critics of Israel and say, okay, there are faults here, but we're not going to say undo this. That's not appropriate.
100%. And I think that's kind of where you and I align so much. And like my brother, who's a libertarian, we align so much on so many things. He's a huge RFK guy, voting for Trump, really for the same reason as you, because RFK.
Right.
And I get it. And like I've had this discussion with him. I'm going to have it again this weekend.
I'm so
and it's okay. I love these conversations. Just don't have them around my mom. She hates them. But
right.
Like I get it. And the people that want to tear this down, like, dude, look at what we are. Like what we are today in America is the greatest thing to ever exist. It's the greatest society to ever exist. And like, I love this country. Everyone should love this country. You absolutely should. It's just such an incredible achievement. And the only, I don't understand anyone looks at that and sees it any other way. Despite our flaws, where we came from, all these things, and like, we're humans. We live in the real world, and we're not going to be this perfect thing. And when you tear something down and build it back up, it will be worse. And Ethiopia is a good example of that. Like they had a monarchy, and it was kind of like very, very, very slowly moving the right direction as societies tend to move more towards more liberal values. There was a social, and this is what scares me about the left. I understand being scared of the left. There was a socialism movement, a Marxism movement. It started in the schools. So you kind of, you see the Palestine thing in the schools. And it started in the schools. This had nothing to do with Jews. It was just like, we need to overthink rights, utopia. We need to overthrow this government. They overthrow the monarchy. And what's been in place now is complete mayhem and even a genocide of the Amra. There's like so many ethnicities inside Ethiopia. I think it's like 80. Should kind of scare America a little bit to be like, hey, look at what happened over here. We're not Ethiopia. We're great. We're fine. But like, there's a genocide of people. They're separating people into separate states within the country. Like it's just this horrible thing.
By ethnicity?
Yeah. And it's just this horrible thing that's going on. And I look at that, like the rest of the world, I see America, I'm like, yeah, we have problems, but like, this is the best thing ever. We should incrementally improve it. And that should be our focus, is to keep it together. The reason I can't vote for Trump, but it's to keep it together.
Yeah, and that's not to like, be a one note piano here, but
no, it's okay.
That's what the argument is, that the critical race theorists are kind of trying to separate and return to I could go on another time about something called limited separation, which is, okay, very quickly, Derek Bell, one of the creators of critical race theory, as it was told to me in law school, lamented on his deathbed that it didn't take in America. The majority white culture in America rejected critical race theory and said, we're not going to take this pill and become something new just because we have these complaints from the black community. We're not going to do that. So he said, we got to do something called limited separation, which can sound like a return to segregation, but it's not. The rules are you're going to have all these black institutions, think HBCUs, but for every kind of thing. So you're talking about people living together, working together, having their own governments and this and that. But the only rule is that it must remain at least 51% black. So you can have non-black participants in these communities, but it's got to have a majority. So these institutions will have a majority black culture. You can participate in it, but you can't overtake it. And it's, how horrible is that? Don't you want to live in America where everyone's an individual and that's it? And I see the right embracing that philosophy. Trump, a controversial, very flawed, very controversial, very flawed, but interesting and talented and funny and all. And
Yeah.
Ironically, despite his reputation, before becoming, at least among people that I knew before becoming president, had these good results. So I just said, you know what, with the Israel layer on top, where I say, hey, I don't know much about the conflict. I'm pretty ignorant. I'm pretty confused internally, but I was raised doing the Pledge of Allegiance with a hand above my heart. I was indoctrinated. I was raised going to JCC with the blue and white color teams. I'm going, gun to my head, I'm going to support Israel. Maybe I don't have the logic behind it or the information behind it, but gun to my head, that's what I'm going to do. So all these things considered, with you could break down Biden's results and the reasons why, and you could argue them, of course, but I say, you know what? I'm going with Trump. I'm going with the right. I'm rejecting this critical race theory. I'm rejecting identity politics. I want to embrace individualism and celebration of success, not victim mindset, not oppression narratives. And that's what it's kind of about for me.
I get it. I truly understand it. And if Trump wins, I hope it all goes smoothly. I hope I can't come back on here in 4 years and be like, he just wrote another 2 chapters for how he can take over America. And so I hope I'm not saying that. I just like, and I hope either way, Israel is good, and I hope the Palestinians are good soon. Sinwar was killed today. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
So that's great news. It's weird to celebrate or to say something that's great about death, but
it so is.
Yeah, but it is great news, and hopefully, it's an inflection point where maybe we can get these hostages back. Maybe we can end this war, at least in Gaza. We'll see what goes on with Iran still. Yeah, we'll see what happens there. But at least in Gaza, maybe this war can end and the Palestinians can, get back to life of some sort. And it's horrible. It's happening. It's weird to say I support the war. I don't really, but there's tens of thousands of people dying. So I want that to end. And hopefully this has a chance to be a new beginning. I unfortunately don't think it will be in this case, but it has a chance to be. Hamas is gone and the leadership is gone. It can be a whole new thing now. And maybe something takes over where we can have a moderate debate. And there has been a silver lining to this. I think a silver lining in general. Like there have been people that have popped up out of the weeds. That John Aziz is one guy, he's a Palestinian. Unfortunately, it's a lot of hate from the Palestinian side, at least online, publicly online. I hope he gets a lot of support privately from that side, but he's just calling for peace. Okay, I want peace with the Jewish state. I want peace with the Zionists. Like, I want to live alongside them. I'm against Hamas and see things that you and I think are common sense. But people like himself are popping up. And he's wrote a couple pieces for the Atlantic, and I think in America you see the free press and you see just good figures like yourself. I'd like to think like myself at this point, but you see good figures popping up, and it's kind of a response of all this that's been happening in the world through different crazy times. Definitely historic times that we're living in. So all that said, hopefully everything's great and better, and I'll talk to you on the other side of this election, sir.
Man, it's a chaotic time, man, with the divisive ideologies and the pandemic and all the chaos. And so hopefully we get through it, man. I pray to. I'm planning on accepting the election results. Now that I'm a newfound Trump supporter, I don't have any indications that I'm going to be rejecting the election results. And so I pray, man, that let's hope it's a landslide one way or another.
I agree. Actually, I agree with that. I think Lex Friedman tweeted that once.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Man. I hope it is a landslide.
But thank you so much, man. Yeah. It's been great talking to you, and you've given me a lot to think about. Unfortunately, I cast my ballot already, so it's over. But next time.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, again, I'm an optimist. I think America is the greatest place ever, and I think we'll be okay either way. Truly.
Yeah.
It's just these fears that I have when I think 30 years out or something. I think or thinking about different topics.
I agree too. I got a lot of shit from my new followers when I said, along the lines of another Lex Friedman quote, I don't think it's going to be a disaster either way. I said, I don't think America is going to collapse or, even be nudged necessarily toward a less positive. Well, I think Trump will be better. That's why I'm voting for him. But I don't think there's a huge difference between the two, only in a little bit of style and a little bit of presence. And I'm going with the style and the presence of Trump, despite all the reasons not to.
I get it. No, I get it. I understand. I'll stay on here. I mean, it's for Maker's Bars is very new for me to have a conversation. Like, so I appreciate you having this with me.
Sure.
But this is kind of what I used to do on my old podcast. This and talk to a lot of business founders and experts and things like that nature. And
Yeah.
but
Well,
as
it's been
you
an
grow,
honor, man.
yeah, no, of course. Man, as you grow, let's stay in touch, and let's do this again sometime in the future. I'd also love to come on your podcast if you want to have
Please,
me on.
no, I'll be sending you. I'll be in touch. I'm so impressed with your posts. You're amazing, man. So
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to have
I
you on.
appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you,
All
sir.
right, sir. I'll let you go. Have a good one.
All right, man. Take care. Good evening.